The world's first nuclear test. Was the USSR taken by surprise? A flash that bright can mean only one thing: a nuclear explosion. On August 6, 1945, the searing light of the first atomic bomb ever dropped by an American bomber on Hiroshima incinerated all living matter in seconds, leaving behind only shadows of people. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second bomb destroyed Nagasaki. The main goal of these horrific bombings was not just to end the war in Japan, it was to intimidate the Soviet Union. These images come from declassified American newsreels. On July 16, 1945, at 5:30 a.m., the United States conducted the world's first nuclear test. During the meeting of the Allied Big Three at the Potsdam Conference, US President Harry Truman could barely contain his excitement. He pulled Stalin aside and informed him that they now had a superweapon of unprecedented power. But the surprise failed. Stalin showed no reaction. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, observing the scene, asked Truman, "Well, how did it go?" Truman replied, "He didn't ask me a single question." Both leaders were convinced that Stalin didn't fully grasp the gravity of the threat. How wrong they were. Western leaders underestimated the skill of Soviet intelligence. Stalin learned about the American atomic bomb long before Truman and Churchill. In mid-1940, Soviet Foreign Intelligence Officer Leonid Kvasnikov noticed something unusual. Scientific articles on atomic topics began disappearing from foreign journals. He suspected that research into the military use of nuclear fission had begun. He shared his observations with Pavel Mikhailovich Fitin, head of Soviet Foreign Intelligence, who took them seriously. Fitin sent a directive to all Western stations: pay special attention to any developments related to the creation of a uranium bomb. Before the war, we all believed, and Stalin in particular, that the greatest threat we faced was chemical attacks by the Germans. Intelligence was focused on gathering any secrets about military chemical and biological laboratories. Gradually, it became clear they were working on something else entirely: nuclear weapons. Which countries were developing them, and how far had they progressed? In operational correspondence, the Soviet Foreign Intelligence mission to obtain Western nuclear secrets was codenamed Enormoz, and is remembered as one of the most brilliant operations in intelligence history. The first verified information that the Western Allies had begun nuclear research came from the London station. The Soviet Center received a report from the British Uranium Committee, unique in that the secret documents were delivered to us simultaneously with the British Prime Minister. Fitin forwarded the data to NKGB head Lavrenti Beria, who dismissed it. Considering the circumstances, October 1941, German troops advancing on major cities, intense battles. Such skepticism is understandable. Stalin also distrusted intelligence services. Days before the war began, he doubted reports from the chief of intelligence about a German attack. When Beria submitted his report, Stalin reportedly swore at him, "Send your source from the German air staff to hell. That's not a source, it's a disinformant." During the 1937 purges, many intelligence leaders were arrested and executed. Most field agents were recalled, accused of treason, and repressed. After these bloody purges, there were simply not enough operatives overseas, and communication with valuable agents was lost. The hardest hit were the most experienced agents, which, in percentage terms, was significant given how few there were. In 1939, When Pavel Fitin became head of foreign intelligence, he was only 31 years old. A young man without much experience was appointed to a position where missteps could mean death. In the 5 years before Fitin, 6 people had held this post. Soon the war would begin, and yet no reliable information about Germany or Britain reached us. In this context, Fitin managed to restore the operations of Soviet intelligence stations, rebuild agent networks, and provide the Soviet leadership with accurate information about both German plans and Allied intentions. His achievements in such a short period were remarkable, truly astonishing. Fitin was not gifted in foreign languages. His sister, an English teacher, tried to teach him, but he was virtually impervious to languages. Even so, he successfully ran Soviet foreign intelligence. Fitin coordinated with agents like Alex, who would later become a model for the fictional Stylitz in 17 Moments of Spring. Over 2 pre-war years, he revived field stations, restored contact with agents, and ensured the USSR was informed about nuclear developments. The 20th century can rightly be called the golden age of intelligence, counterintelligence, and the theoretical study of espionage. One of the first thinkers in this field, Colonel Walter Nicolai of the German General Staff, noted that nations that underestimate the power of intelligence inevitably fall victim to foreign espionage. From the Western perspective, Russia, then the Soviet Union, represented a critical continental core they sought to control. After the end of foreign intervention in 1921 to 22, the West remained fearful of Soviet power. Their main goal became containment, and nuclear weapons were a key tool in this strategy. Thus, Truman's excitement over the atomic test is understandable. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the next target, at least in American planning, was the USSR. But the plans of the US leadership were thwarted by Soviet intelligence. In winter 1941, Vladimir Barkovsky, an officer of Soviet scientific technical intelligence, arrived in London. Undercover as a cultural attaché, he secretly worked with British scientists. One of his most valuable sources was a nuclear physicist working at the heart of the British atomic project. During a critical meeting, the physicist told Barkovsky, "You must fully understand these blueprints and materials." Barkovsky replied, "Perhaps I can just ask questions and relay the answers to Moscow." The source insisted that he study everything in detail. Barkovsky, who had only recently learned English, studied complex foreign textbooks from scratch. In just 1 month of night work, he mastered formulas beyond the understanding of many physicists. This enabled him to collect critical intelligence from Western scientists, cooperating with the USSR. Among the most significant was Klaus Fuchs, a German communist and son of a pastor. Saved by the German Communist Party, Fuchs fled Germany and eventually became one of the key theoretical contributors to the British atomic bomb project. Thanks to operatives like Barkovsky and Fuchs, the USSR was able to counterbalance US nuclear ambitions and develop its own atomic program, neutralizing the intended shock effect of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Soviet espionage and the nuclear race, from World War II to the Cold War. In late September 1942, Soviet intelligence was operating on a purely ideological basis. Amid the brutal Battle of Stalingrad, the USSR issued a decree from the State Defense Committee to begin uranium research. By that time, the United Kingdom and the United States had joined forces with their scientists, and Nazi Germany's nuclear program was in full swing. Soviet intelligence worked out of conviction, not for pay. Agents, referred to as friends, refused any money. As one operative reportedly said, "Money, shameful. We work so that the USSR defeats Hitler. We work so that a global atomic balance is created. We want both our nations to have equal weapons." By November 1943, Soviet intelligence had learned that Klaus Fuchs, Theodore Hall, and Soviet contact Leontina Cohen had traveled to the United States. In the secret town of Los Alamos, Fuchs continued his nuclear weapons research. He was not the only agent supplying Moscow with crucial information. From Los Alamos, the Soviets received data on the testing date of the first bomb and the bombings of Japan. Another critical agent, known by the codename Malad, worked quietly yet profoundly. Over a decade later, the Soviets searched for him extensively. During the war, he was allowed to work in Los Alamos with minimal notice, wearing ragged shoes, sometimes shorts, blending in. Mlad never accepted money. His motivation was purely ideological. Once the war ended in 1945, Mlad initially refused to continue cooperating. Retaining him fell to one of the best Soviet radio operators and persuaders, William Fisher, known in the West as Rudolf Abel. Theodore Hall, codenamed Malad, handed over the final schematics of the bomb to Soviet contact Leontina Cohen. To approach the secret lab, Cohen pretended to be a patient from a tuberculosis hospital in a nearby town. She concealed critical documents inside a box of tissues allegedly used for coughing. At the train station, all passengers were being searched by plainclothes officers. With only a minute to departure, Cohen ran onto the platform, offered the box to an officer to hold, and began rifling through her bag, an act that could have cost her life. Fortunately, the officer returned the box, and she boarded safely. Even before victory salutes had faded, the world faced a new threat. From the summer of 1945, the US became the sole possessor of nuclear weapons. This supremacy inspired a series of global military plans to bomb the USSR, first 20 strikes, then 300, then 350, and more. President Truman repeatedly suggested taking advantage of this edge to strike the Soviet Union. Earlier, under Winston Churchill's direction, Operation Unthinkable had been developed, a total war against the Soviet Union slated to begin July 1st, 1945. During the war, Churchill even instructed General Montgomery, commander of British forces, to arm Germans in case Soviet troops crossed the Elbe. Churchill, who had initiated foreign interventions in 1919 to 21 as Britain's military minister, remained hostile to Russia and the USSR, despising the country outright. After the war, the devastated Soviet Union directed all its energy toward creating an atomic bomb. This was not just a matter of national survival, it was about the survival of the planet. The Soviet atomic bomb was the result of the work of hundreds of thousands of citizens, many of whom were unaware that they were contributing to the country's nuclear defense. The Americans suspected, of course, that the USSR was pursuing nuclear weapons. According to US intelligence, they expected the Soviets would not succeed until 1957. Today, we stand in the storage of the Polytechnic Museum, in front of the first Soviet atomic bomb, RDS-1. Measuring nearly 4 meters in length, 1.5 meters in diameter, and weighing 4.5 tons with its nuclear charge, it looks almost cartoonish. Yet inside, it contains numerous advanced mechanisms. Radio frequency altimeters, for example, allowed the bomb to determine its altitude for tactical maneuvers. This is a replica of the very first Soviet atomic bomb, tested on August 29, 1949, at the Semipalatinsk test site. The emergence of the Soviet nuclear arsenal was detected by American meteorologists, and the iconic mushroom cloud overturned global power dynamics overnight. US plans for world domination were shattered. Nuclear parity was achieved, tempering the ambitions of many policymakers. While a hot war became unlikely, the Cold War was only gaining momentum. From the late 1940s, anti-Soviet hysteria spread through the US. Citizens were persecuted for communist sympathies, and the USSR was declared the center of evil. In 1947, the National Security Act granted the newly formed CIA extraordinary powers. Some historians even suggest CIA involvement in President Kennedy's assassination, given that he had opposed escalation in the Cold War and sought engagement with the Soviet Union. In the late 1940s, Soviet agent Elizabeth Bentley defected to the FBI, compromising many American agents. By the early 1950s, Soviet diplomats were restricted to traveling within 20 miles of Washington, D.C., while clandestine agents bore additional responsibilities. Legal versus illegal agents. A legal agent is usually a diplomat or trade representative, often protected from arrest. Failure results in expulsion, not imprisonment. An illegal agent works under a false identity and biography, posing as a citizen of the target country. The work is dangerous. Any mistake can be fatal. The legendary Vartanyan's illegal intelligence work reached legendary heights with Gevorg Vartanyan and his wife Gore. Gore married the same man 3 times under different names in different countries. Gevorg, the legendary agent, worked for 121 years in terms of combined operational experience, a 1 in 3 success ratio for illegal operations. In 2007, Winston Churchill's granddaughter, Celia Sandys, visited Moscow to meet the person who had saved her grandfather's life. In 1943, during the Tehran Conference, the Vartanyans and other Soviet agents prevented an assassination attempt on Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill. Gore was 17, Gevorg 19. Their deeds, which earned Gevorg the title Hero of the Soviet Union, remain largely unknown. Soviet foreign intelligence officially began in the winter of 1920 with the creation of the Foreign Department of the Cheka. To protect the interests of the young Soviet state, it was essential to gather accurate information about adversaries, their secrets, and military plans. The USSR's illegal intelligence network was unique, a necessary response to isolation in the early 1920s. Operatives like Gevorg and Gore, codenamed Henry and Anita, lived the lives of wealthy business people, mingled in aristocratic circles, and even befriended the spouses of high-ranking US military officers, CIA, and FBI personnel, completely unaware of the real identities behind these agents. Soviet espionage in action, from Europe to America and the Berlin Tunnel. Once, on a direct order from Soviet intelligence headquarters, Henry Gevorg Vartanyan had to urgently fly from Europe to the United States. For assistance, the illegal agent turned to the man who would later become the CIA director, unknowingly helping Soviet intelligence conduct an operation on American soil. Gevorg requested a US visa and received it within a single day. He was then flown aboard a personal plane belonging to the NATO commander in that part of Europe, where Henry and Anita were living at the time. The plane transported him to the US and back again. This illustrates the extraordinary reach of Soviet intelligence. In terms of penetration, only another legendary illegal agent could rival D'Artagnan, Joseph Grigulevich. In the early 1950s, at the UN General Assembly's 6th session in Paris, the Costa Rican ambassador in Italy, Teodoro Castro, delivered a speech condemning the USSR. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyshinsky was furious, calling Castro a chained dog of imperialism and an enemy of the Soviet Union. The twist: Castro was actually a Soviet illegal agent, a fact unknown to Vyshinsky. Grigulevich began his work in the 1930s, focusing on Latin America. He participated in the operation to eliminate Trotsky and fought fascists in Argentina during World War II. During the Great Patriotic War, his teams placed explosive devices on nitrate warehouses and ships transporting strategic materials from Argentina to Germany. In 1949, Soviet intelligence sent Grigulevich to Italy, where he established a major international coffee company. By October 1950, a delegation of Costa Rican politicians, including a former president, visited Italy. The ex-president was impressed by Grigulevich's political acumen and understanding of both European and Latin American affairs, and he even encouraged him to draft a program for his own political party. He was offered a high-ranking diplomatic post in return. Grigulevich maintained extensive intelligence contacts, including documents such as on the deployment of American nuclear weapons in European countries and on the NATO Council meeting in Lisbon. It's unknown how far he could have risen if, in 1953, after Stalin's death, he hadn't been recalled to Moscow during the ensuing purges and organizational reshuffling. In March 1954, the Soviet Union officially proposed joining NATO to ensure continental security. NATO leadership dismissed it as absurd, highlighting their hostile stance toward the USSR and revealing the limits of post-war diplomacy. By the summer of 1957, during the World Festival of Youth and Students in Moscow, over 30,000 foreign guests were introduced to the USSR. Soviets proved warm and welcoming, defying Western propaganda. Yet, the intelligence services were already tasked with strengthening espionage against the US and Britain, the perceived main threats. The existence of nuclear weapons demanded a new approach to intelligence, focused on detecting early signs of a potential atomic strike on the USSR. Psychological warfare and illegal intelligence. True peace never existed between the USSR and the US. During World War II, collaboration occurred, but the struggle never ceased. One illustrative anecdote. In the early 20th century, General Louis-Joe Bailliot, commanding French troops in Morocco and Algeria, instructed soldiers to plant trees along a road at noon under the scorching sun. "They'll take 50 years to grow," protested a subordinate. "Precisely why we start today," replied the general. This story prefaced a 1953 top-secret British intelligence document outlining psychological warfare against the USSR, codenamed Operation Lyoto, anticipating results decades later. By the early 1960s, when the US and Britain realized they could not defeat communism through nuclear war, they devised a long-term plan to weaken the USSR. Operation Lyoto aimed to achieve this peacefully: discredit the Communist Party, incite ethnic strife, ridicule patriotism, and support dissident movements. It targeted the Socialist Bloc, the Caucasus, and Central Asia, exploiting historical Western influence in Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan. Even as US leaders publicly advocated peace, they authorized blatant violations of Soviet airspace. Between 1956 and 1961, American reconnaissance planes conducted roughly 158 flights over Soviet territory. In April 1956, Soviet communications technicians in Berlin discovered a spy tunnel leading toward West Germany. It contained listening devices intercepting Soviet telephone communications. The operation was publicly exposed to foreign journalists as a staged scandal, though Soviet intelligence had known of the half-kilometer tunnel from the start. British intelligence officer George Blake had passed the information to the USSR. Blake's career began at age 22. In 1949, on the eve of the Korean War, he was sent to Seoul to gather intelligence on the Soviet Far East. Witnessing the American air raids on defenseless Korean villages, Blake, deeply religious, became disillusioned with the West. He was eventually captured, and during 3 years of captivity in North Korea, studied Marx's Capital in Russian to practice the language. He was profoundly influenced, seeing parallels between Christian and communist ethics, and requested to meet Soviet representatives, offering cooperation. Blake returned to the UK as a Soviet agent. The Berlin Tunnel operation was one of many he contributed to. In the spring of 1961, he was arrested and sentenced to 42 years in prison, 1 year for each agent he exposed, though Blake later claimed it was closer to 400. His contributions to the USSR during the Cold War were immense, undertaken purely on ideological grounds without receiving any payment. His betrayal came at the hands of Polish defector Mikhail Goleniewski, highlighting the constant dangers facing illegal agents. The high stakes of Soviet illegal espionage, from Europe to South Africa. Even the smallest details could ruin an operation. How could an agent's mindset betray them and compromise an entire mission? Sometimes it's as trivial as counting. In the USSR, we counted on our fingers. Americans used theirs. In some Middle Eastern countries, counting starts with the pinky. During Soviet times, people could also be identified by vaccination marks on their arms, or even cement fillings in their teeth. Female agents stood out in Western clothing stores. They put on dresses from the top down, unlike European women who did it from the bottom up. Take Lyudmila Noykina, an illegal agent operating in Europe. On her first trip, she went shopping for a dress. A store clerk, trying to help, peeked behind the changing room curtain and noticed her bra. European women already used hook-and-eye fastenings at the back, while Soviet women used buttons. That small detail immediately revealed Lyudmila's origin. Lyudmila and her husband Vitaly Noykin focused on scientific and technical intelligence, a key branch of Soviet foreign intelligence in the 1960s. Their achievements included technology for durable drill bits for oil and gas wells, as well as military-industrial secrets for the Soviet missile and space programs. In 1977, intelligence headquarters received reports that South Africa, with some help from Israel, had developed nuclear weapons. Soviet illegal agent Alexei Kozlov was dispatched to verify this. Arriving in South Africa under the alias Otto Schmidt, a German businessman, Kozlov gained access to local circles, giving him the freedom to move from country to country. In Malawi, Kozlov befriended affluent German expatriates at a local bar. There, he met a former employee of a nuclear research center in Pelindaba. Over drinks, she revealed critical details about South Africa's nuclear program, confirming successful tests in December 1976, attended by many Israelis. South Africa, as a rogue state, with an uncontrolled nuclear arsenal, posed a grave global threat. Kozlov collected irrefutable evidence and transmitted it to Moscow. In 1980, during another trip to South Africa, Kozlov was arrested on terrorism charges. South African law denied him a lawyer or trial, and diplomatic channels were non-existent. He was subjected to extreme psychological torture, repeatedly led to execution grounds, placed in a tiny metal cell in 122 degrees Fahrenheit heat, and interrogated by multiple international agencies. Germans were cautious and formal, the French brutal, Americans rude, and even an Israeli agent beat him mercilessly during questioning. Kozlov's betrayal came later. Former KGB Colonel Oleg Gordevsky, his classmate at MGIMO, had tipped off the West. For 2 years, Moscow did not know Kozlov was imprisoned or being interrogated. Through intelligence channels in East Germany, Soviet agents eventually confirmed his location and the interrogation protocols. Kozlov refused to reveal a single name. In spring 1982, he was finally released. 1 Soviet agent exchanged for 11 prisoners, 10 West German spies, and 1 military officer. Thanks to Kozlov's intelligence, the Soviet leadership was able to pressure the global community. Under international scrutiny, South Africa first halted its nuclear program and later abandoned military use of atomic energy altogether. Soon after, the apartheid regime collapsed. Kozlov had earned his place in global history. When Kozlov returned to the USSR in 1982, his wife had passed away, and his children, raised in an orphanage, had barely seen him. A Soviet contact brought him photographs of his grown children for a secret meeting. Instructions: glance, don't cry, and burn the photos afterward. Lyudmila Noykina, however, kept a tiny photo of her eldest son close to her heart, a grave breach of protocol. She still cries when recounting it. For spies, service to the motherland is nearly a religion. They sacrifice personal happiness, embrace solitude, and risk everything. To mark a century of Soviet foreign intelligence, a monument was unveiled at headquarters honoring figures like Alexei Botyan, Joseph Grigulevich, the Vartanians, Leonid Kvasnikov, Vladimir Barkovsky, and the famed Cambridge Five, George Blake, Leontina, and Morris Cohen. Ironically, those who become famous are often the ones whose work is exposed. For illegal agents, the ultimate reward is complete anonymity. Many of the Cold War secrets they uncovered remain classified indefinitely. What these heroes achieved abroad during decades of clandestine operations may never be fully revealed.